Very concerned. I think that the folks in the Republican Congress are already talking about things they envision doing if and when they take control of either the House or Senate. There are a number of things, I think this idea that, well, we're going to defund the FBI is a little bit fanciful, but there's certainly things that they can do short of that, very targeted in terms of saying, we are not going to allow you to use funding for certain investigations or for certain categories of investigations. We can, they could seek to impeach Merrick Garland. They could certainly hold hearing after hearing after hearing. But I think what we should be prepared for is a level of destruction coming from a Republican Congress unlike anything we've seen before, specifically targeting the January 6th investigations, but really going after anything seen as a threat to Donald Trump.
Peter Strzok, we want to appreciate your time. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you.
We want to dive deeper into this with those extremist threats as well. Let's bring in Eric Ward. He's the senior advisor at Western State Center. Now, he's an expert on the relationship between hate, violence, and democracy. Eric, welcome in. We appreciate your time. Now, former President Trump has legitimized domestic political violence in this country, but it's not just him. Other Republican figureheads have pushed this violent messaging as well. Steve Bannon labeled the FBI a Gestapo. Georgia Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene called on Congress to defund the FBI, as we just spoke with Peter, and far-right pundits go on Fox News every day declaring war against the FBI and other federal agents. Tell us what's at stake here.
There's a lot at stake, and we should all be concerned by the rhetoric coming out of the Trump circle in this moment. We have not only watched elected officials utilize rhetoric that tries to encourage violence or justify violence towards the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We have now watched individuals take up on that rhetoric. In Pennsylvania and in Ohio, the Federal Bureau of Investigation is telling us that there are unprecedented numbers of threats coming into FBI agents' offices and towards possible agents. An ex-Trump aide was just held responsible for doxing family members of purported FBI agents. We're in a serious moment. But look, we have to understand that it doesn't matter whether it's a search warrant, whether it's upholding fair and safe elections. We are dealing with a constituency that is looking for any justification for violence. And we have to pause for a second and say this is worrisome. But we also have to be proud of the federal government for leaning into the rule of law. It is critically important that we don't allow ourselves to be bullied. It's time to bring transparency and accountability to those who want to use political violence to overthrow the United States of America.
But it's also time to give these law enforcement agencies that has these bullies, that has these illegitimate people working in their system, towards
yes. So I think it's important as U.S.
you have them be accountable for their actions too as well.
Criminal activity, not the politics.
In other words, what's fair for the goose is fair for the gander.
It's important that law enforcement from the federal level, the local level, don't allow themselves to be brought into the politicization that the far right seeks. So you have to focus on crime and holding people accountable for breaking the law. But look, we can't put the entire burden on law enforcement to solve what is a political crisis in this country. We need business leaders, faith leaders, civil society leaders at the local level to begin to speak up. We need more Republicans to condemn acts and threats of political violence. We have to take this moment seriously and not leave the burden on law enforcement to solve issues outside of criminal violations.
Okay, not to do exactly the opposite of what you just spoke about, but people who do make any of these vicious rhetoric threats or just in general the rhetoric that they're putting out there, the hatred that they're putting out there, and if it does lead to violence, could they face any consequences?
I believe so. I think they can face consequences in civil court. We saw this through the work of Integrity First for America and its successful attempt to hold neo-Nazis accountable for the violence in Charlottesville, Virginia at the Unite the Right rally. We are watching other local governments move into motion as well. There are certain avenues, of course, education, civil litigation, but at the end of the day, government needs to understand and hear from American citizens that we support the rule of law, that we are not going to allow ourselves to be
I agree with that.
small majority of America. We're willing to use violence in order to subvert American democracy. We need to ask Republican leaders and to back up those Republican leaders who are condemning political violence, who are condemning the coup that took place on January 6th. They need our support. There's much we can do, but we have to use our voices right now and to let our elected officials know we stand by them in this moment.
There's no doubt that the threats have been amplified ever since the Capitol insurrection or the attempted insurrection. Do you view that day as a turning point?
It certainly was a turning point on January 6th. We watched the elements of the far right in the United States orchestrate what appears to be a coup. And the January 6th committee, of course, is investigating this and bringing strong evidence forward, ultimately be up for the courts to decide. But in American opinion, we have to pay attention to those who seek to subvert our democracy. We've worked hard. Veterans have died for this democracy. We have all sacrificed to make a society where everyone can move forward together. And there are...
I agree with the things that he's talking about, but I also agree with this too as well, that it's time to hold these unions accountable pertaining to immunity laws, in the degree that if the George Floyd ordeal would have happened 30, 40, 50 years ago, we today would probably have never known about the abusiveness coming from not just one police officer, but basically 2 or 3 of them that was engaged in that public execution with George Floyd. And of course, we can look through other proceedings that has happened here in America where people's rights has been violated and people's been bullied and people's been shot and people's been taken advantage of again and again and again. We know for a fact that the system is not perfect. I think in average of about 3% of people that used to be, maybe not so much now because of the forensic science evidence that they can now produce, but it used to be a higher percentage than 3% that went to jail for a life and they wasn't guilty of the crime that they was accused of. So whenever you have biased police officers, biased judges, biased Secret Service agents, and if you don't believe me, all you got to do under the Information Freedom Act is look up my record in Wheeling, West Virginia in 1991 towards a group of people that said that I was on my way to Washington, D.C. towards taking out George Walker Bush's life. And the whole time, instead of me on my way to harm a president, I was on my way to try to bring awareness that they had went to war with the wrong people pertaining to Saddam Hussein not having bombs or mass destruction of whatever over in their country. And that's exactly where America took its left turn to where it should have took its right. You know, we wanted to preach to the rest of the nations pertaining to peace, and the world wasn't going to be destroyed by nuclear holocaust, but yet didn't nobody want to support the messenger with the very message about that message. Nobody did. They all frowned on it. And that's the reason why I say to this day that they only talk about peace in America, but in reality, their hearts is far from peace, because in reality, is the courts going to make money off of peace? Is the probation officers going to make money off of peace? Is the court system going to make money off of peace? Is the jail system going to make money off of peace? I think you know the answers to all those questions. So, you know, it's one thing to say that you support peace, and it's another thing to actually act upon it. And I have not seen Americans acting upon the true identity of wanting peace, because if they did, I truly believe that they would have supported the founder of the Windmill Ministries missions beginning in 1989, whenever I first stood out into the eyes of the general public. It was 1989 whenever Homeland Security intervened with a ministry and took something from a ministry, separation between church and state that they had no right in taking. And ever since then, I've went through calamity after calamity after calamity towards people trying to stop, hinder, trying to basically eradicate this message that God had given to me to give to the people. And most of the people that's been involved in this movement has been those that claims to be Christians.
As more migrants from Texas are being bused to cities in the Northeast. Republican Texas Governor Greg Abbott says he's fed up with the Biden administration's immigration policy, so he's sending asylum seekers to Democratic-run cities like New York and Washington, D.C. New York City Mayor Eric Adams says at least 6,000 migrants have arrived in the city since May. I want to bring in Grayson Martinez Rosas now, and she's the executive director of
I want to bring up something pertaining to a national security that a lot of people hasn't either recognized or wasn't smart enough towards being qualified to understand. Whenever you look at the water table level out in Arizona, I forgot the name of their big water reserve area. If you look at the water table pertaining to Lake Mead, if you look at the water table in other parts of out west, people immediately think that this was all caused because of droughts and the exposure of global warming towards drying up areas that have never been dried up, including a great deal of our aquadors, underground streams from basically Kansas through Oklahoma and even Texas. You keep in mind a great deal of those aquadors are fed from the agriculture communities by putting in these irrigation systems. And if the truth be known, probably over 50% of the crops, the agriculture crops that come from California and out west, are fed from aquadors. They're fed from underground streams. Well, whenever you don't have the water being put back in to those areas, and you're taking more water out than you're putting in, then you're going to have the problem of stuff drying up. But there's also another element that a great deal of the people has not looked at that's generated around the problem that they're looking at right here, pertaining to New York City mayor obtaining over 6,000 plus migrants that has been brought in by the Texas people, the Texan government. The Texans, for the past 30 plus years, wanted to take advantage of their labor laws to the degree towards allowing for these immigrants to come over and work for about half the amount of money that most of the Americans would have demanded to been paid for. They done the same thing in Homestead whenever Hurricane Andrew come up through there. They opened up the doors for a great deal of the immigrants coming from Cuba, until all of a sudden now Cuba is basically running Miami and other parts of southern Florida. Well, you got the same thing with Texas. You opened up your borders. You wanted all this illegal activity to be going on, including all your drug addiction use, towards them bringing fentanyl and everything else over the Rio Grande. And then all of a sudden you've been intimidated by it, and now you want to pass the buck and start putting the people in other parts of the country. Well, guess what? New York City always has and always will have its immigrant problem towards people coming from other parts of the country like Canada or Ireland or Greenland or even places over towards, let's say, the Elks or Sweden or wherever. And of course, if you go on the other side of America, on the Washington state side, you got people that's piling in from Canada and also from Russia, because you got, within 60 miles between Russia and Alaska, in the dead winter time, if it's a big winter, you can actually walk it. You can walk from Alaska to Russia or from Russia to Alaska. So that area up in there has been inundated by a great deal of French as well as Russians, And of course, if you look at it theoretically, if you got a body of water such as Lake Mead, the Colorado River, instead of you having 20 million people that's drinking from the faucet, now all of a sudden you got 40 million people drinking from the same faucet. Or possibly even 50 million people drinking from the same faucet. What do you think is going to happen if you have more going out than you got coming in? It works with the same way with the money situation. It works with the same way in anything. Any type of business. You got to have more money coming in than you got going out if you're going to stay and remain in business. Same way with the water problem out west. Some way or another, they're either going to have to stop the immigrants from coming to America until we can regroup and take on this type of a load. And it's not just the water. It's also pertaining to energy, electricity. Our grid system is overloaded. They got to go through brownouts and blackouts and every other kind of outs. Last year in Texas, not last year, but the year before, whenever the big freeze hit down there, killed over 800 people. Okay, because Texas didn't want to be hooked up to the international grid, and their grid system overheated, got hot because there was too many people demanding to run heaters, and basically it fried. It fried, and during the time that it fried, that's whenever so many people died. Some of them died of being frozen to death. Some of them died of carbon dioxide towards having generators parked too close to their houses, etc., etc. You had a lot of people that was on medication. You had a lot of people that was on ventilator systems. You had a lot of people that was just very, very sensitive in their health issues that was already borderline. And then all of a sudden, you're going to shut off the electricity. You're going to have havoc. Well, once more, whenever you have that many people pulling on the grid system, you're going to overload the grid system. Same way with the water. Whenever you got so many people out west that's drinking from the same fountain, and there's less water going in than it is coming out, guess what? You got a serious, serious problem. And to be quite frank with you, I'm really surprised that our leadership pertaining to the I don't forgot the name of it, geological whatever, that's basically is supposed to keep in check with all this stuff, as well as the Corps of Engineers, as well as various electrical service entities. I'm really surprised that somebody hadn't already done checkmark this probably 2 to 5, maybe even 7 years ago, that we got a problem. Houston, we got a problem. Our water table here in the Colorado River base, Lake Mead, has dropped 200 plus feet, or around 200 feet. Now, granted, they just got some big heavy rains within the past week. I think it filled the system back up to about a foot. But what is a foot compared to 200 feet? That's a drop in the bucket. That's only a drop in the bucket. Because anytime you have this many foreigners coming over to America, it is putting the squeeze on everything else. It's putting a squeeze on our road system. It's putting a squeeze on our oxygen. It's putting a squeeze on our water. It's putting a squeeze on our electricity. It's putting a squeeze on our labor pertaining to our young men and women, our true Native Americans that's been here for generations and generations, that now because you got all these illegals here, now you're taking away jobs from people that could be working, that would be true Americans. And it's just one problem exacerbating another problem that is creating this chaotic event that we're now in. And now the people are lashing out towards their problems at hand. I agree they shouldn't be lashing out on the Bureau itself, because the Bureau itself was associated in a good form towards lawbreakers. Just like you shouldn't attack all the churches, because not all the churches are corrupt. Not all the churches is lukewarm. There are some good people in the churches, just like there are some good people in the FBI pertaining to the Bureau. There are some good people in Secret Service. There are some good people pertaining to first responders and firemen and people that really go beyond the call of duty in what they do in protecting and bringing services to the American people. I agree with a great deal of the stuff that that individual that she was interviewing a while ago just got through saying, but I also agree that the police force, regardless whether it's the federal, state, or the locals, need to be scrutinized and evaluated, because I can prove that they have basically independently, intentionally tried to destroy, eliminate, eradicate this message because they did not like the message. They wanted to eradicate the messenger. Once more, that is a reflection upon the locals around here in this area that did not want to support the Windmill Ministries missions because either A, they didn't understand it, or B, they was scared of it. But now we're dealing with what we're dealing with on a much more international, national level, that basically they're going to have to give an account of the reason why that all these churches that I spent so much time with towards putting out all this material, including the judicial system right up here in Dresden, Tennessee, and over here in the little town of Kenton, Tennessee, are going to have to give an account for one day. They're going to be questioned of why they didn't do what they should have done, that they know to do, but they didn't do it anyway.
The 2022 midterms just 80 days away, and a lot is hanging in the balance. Control over both the House and Senate are at stake, and the races, which were previously thought to be all but guaranteed.
I don't care nothing about all that. It's a bunch of politics, and that's what's got us into trouble now, is that everybody wants to play politics. They don't want to come up with a solution to the problems. They just want to sit around and blame each other for the problems that we're now experiencing. We do not have good, sound leadership. We do not have good, sound, what would be the right word?
As he's inclined to unseal.
We do not have good, sound thinkers of today's society, because guess what? We've got smartphone. We got the internet. And we got all these rich people and all these so-called successful people that's supposed to be thinking for us. Well, guess what? We see where their thinking has now gotten us. In other words, the boomers, they have made their mark. The vast majority of them has come out on top. They've been successful in working. They've got houses. They've got bank accounts. They've got nice cars. They've put their children through education. And they're sitting back on Easy Street, living out their golden years, in which there's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. They have fought and been loyal and done that, and they deserve that. But on the other hand, they took their eye off the ball pertaining to NAFTA, and all the jobs went south, and we got sold downstream by all these politicians, and now they're trying to make up for lost time, and they can't do it because the cliffhanger has shifted too far, and because it shifted as far as what it shifted, now the true identity towards what is actually going on is now being exposed. It's being exposed. And instead of us putting our heads together towards trying to figure out a solution to the problem, it's much easier to blame one another for the problems. Well, blaming one another for the problems that's been created is not going to be the solution to the problem. All that basically is going to do is create more problems.
Of the search affidavit, and has ordered the Justice Department to make redactions. Then there's Trump's effort to overturn the results of the 2020 election.
My case was redacted up in Kentucky. The state of Tennessee did not acknowledge that. The state of Tennessee, what they'd done pertaining to their weekly county courts in the year 2007 after my brother died was an illegal act. They themselves should have handcuffs placed up onto their bodies, and they should be put in jail, and there should be a court pertaining to why they done what they done to my brother and I, David Jeffrey Jackson, because I can prove that there was probably at least, I'm going to say 4, maybe 5 dozen telephone calls given to the judicial system pertaining to the sheriff's department here in Weakley County within a 3-year period from the time that I stepped forth back in Tennessee in 2014 up until my brother died in 2017. And every time we went to court, every time we hired attorneys, every time we tried to get something done, it was just like us basically whistling Dixie. The courts are guilty of not only that, but they're also guilty towards they didn't want to identify the trueness of this message. They sat back and allowed for people to neglect. They sat back and allowed for the church world to abuse the founder simply because the vast majority of them didn't either agree with the message or they didn't like the message. And because they didn't like the message coming out of the book of Revelations, as well as John 3:16, as well as the book of Daniel, they took it out on the messenger. Proof is in the pudding towards what went on from the time I stepped foot back at 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255. Proof is in the pudding towards what actually happened that should not have happened in any part of the United States pertaining to my brother and I being taken advantage of and being abused, and the court system that did not and would not do their jobs in dereliction of duty. Still to this day, the same people that I'm talking about has not been held accountable for these actions. Still to this day. Still to this day. There's not been any type of confirmation towards what went on in my life in Kenton, Tennessee. Still to this day. Still to this day. There hasn't been no confirmation pertaining to the federal courts in Paducah, Kentucky that was overseeing Land Between the Lakes. It wasn't no justification in what that they tried to do to me in trying to make me out to be a homegrown terrorist, the same as they done right up here in Martin, Tennessee, towards falsifying files, supposedly, that has terrorist implications. Still to this day, the state of Kentucky, Cadiz, Kentucky, pertaining to Judge Woodall, has yet to give an account towards the abuse that they done towards the long arm of the law, taking 2 non-threatening telephone calls that was not in any form of violation and turning it into a federal case by taking almost a year out of my life and poisoning me with Risperdal or something like that. Still to this day, I have not gotten any type of closure or confirmation pertaining to them planting a bomb in the back of my truck in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma in 2009, and then posting me all over their local news centers that breached out into international centers that stained me towards making me look like that I was some sort of a homegrown terrorist, that still to this day, the newspaper of the Kentucky New Era in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, has yet to be held accountable for the misguidings that they put on the front page, about 6 lines of nothing but propaganda pertaining to character assassination. Still to this day, Homeland Security has yet to give an account towards what they done in the arrest in Madison County, Tennessee in 1989. Still to this day, the federal government, working through Wheeling, West Virginia, Homeland Security, has yet to rectify that in which what they had done with the individual that's speaking right now towards charging him with the charges of being an assassin towards going to take out one of their American presidents, which was nothing more than a pure mere lie. Like I said a while ago, if you don't believe me, under the Freedom of Information Act, you can go to Wheeling, West Virginia, look at their federal courts in 1991 under the name of Dennis Jackson, being represented by their public offender, Jolene Nugent. You can still see to this day the paperwork, the filing of going to Butner, North Carolina, being evaluated, that took, once more, a great deal of time out of my life simply because I was on my way to Washington, D.C. to try to persuade our government that they had went to war with the wrong people pertaining to Saddam Hussein and bombs of mass destruction. Still to this day, certain people in our government pertaining to the Bushes has yet to get to the bottom of 9/11 towards who actually allowed for that occurrence to happen, that are still at large pertaining to the Saudi Arabian government. Still to this day. And you wonder how come all these events are going crazy with our water, all these diseases, all these threats, all these other problems. You wonder? Quit wondering. Quit wondering, because justice is not being performed here upon to the United States soil anymore, and it's basically turning into nothing but a circus. And I tend to wonder at any given moment whenever the two-headed calf or possibly the bearded lady's going to come out of it being nothing more than a freak show. And they knew this. The Republicans knew this whenever they put the circus clown in the circus. They knew that it was going to be a diversion and that people would take their eyes off of the true perpetrators that caused this problem and start looking at other things, kind of like the January 6th deal. That was basically another diversion. You know, whenever you're going to rob the bank, what do? You start a fire on the other side of town, and you get everybody going over there towards trying to put the fire out. In the meantime, you're going into the bank and walking in and doing what you're doing and getting absolutely no resistance. It's a diversion. It's a way of taking our minds off of the true problems and thinking about stuff that isn't going to solve the problem to begin with, and we're still not holding the right people accountable in regards to all this. So, is it a mess? Oh, it goes beyond a mess. It's a travesty is what it is, and to this day, these people have still not give an account.
2020 election. His former White House lawyer, Eric Hirschman, was recently subpoenaed to testify before a grand jury in that matter. And then there's a criminal investigation in Fulton County, Georgia, a key target in Trump's effort to nullify Georgia's 2020 electoral votes by putting pressure on Georgia's Secretary of State to find votes. We know a target of that investigation.
We all know that Donald Trump was hard-headed. We all know Donald Trump done the wrong thing with the election. We all know Donald Trump was the ones that basically masterminded, that got everybody all hyped up in the regards towards January 6th. And if the truth be known, the Democrats probably know that something was going to go on pretty big. It just so happens there wasn't no National Guard there that day, and basically things got way out of hand in the degree that they didn't think that it was going to go that far, but it did. But it did. The sad thing about it is that if it would have been well coordinated and organized, that ordeal in the Capitol building January the 6th over a year and a half ago could have turned out to have been 1,000 times worse than what it turned out. Simply because of the non-professionalism in our government. Our government has let us down again and again and again, and it's time for accountability.
We're talking about not just the information that the Justice Department would have observed themselves that would have led them to believe that a crime could have been potentially committed, but also the potential informants, as well as just the entire blueprint, really, that we're looking here for what they're potential strategies for potentially bringing charges could end up being in the situation. So given that extensiveness of the document, the lengthiness of the document, and the fact that it could jeopardize not just the security of potential witnesses who testified before or gave information to the Justice Department, but also the actual agents who were involved in this potential investigation. It is a very, very unprecedented step, but there's nothing precedented about this particular issue.
No, everything about this entire conversation is unprecedented. I think it is important to note here that the violence, the spike in violence in law enforcement is due to the rhetoric by Donald Trump and many of his allies, his dangerous rhetoric that he knows is causing disruption and fueling what we've seen out there. And don't take my word for it. Former Attorney General Eric Holder, he had something to say about this too. Let me play this for you guys right now.
That's something that really pisses me off. You know, this notion that somehow or other you're going to go after federal agents and imply that they were planting information, you know, let out the names of the people, the agents who were involved in this process, knowing full well that meant that they were going to be put in danger. If the next time the Republican Party and leaders of that party and Donald Trump say that they are law and order people, I hope the American people will remember how they treated people in law enforcement around this Mar-a-Lago incident. This is something that really, really, really makes me angry.
Carol, I think it's important to note that this kind of incitement from Trump and his allies, it has regularly happened. So are there any avenues to hold Donald Trump accountable or anyone spewing this vitriol if the latest threats turn into action from any of the former president's supporters?
Well, look, I'm not going to talk about former President Trump at this time because obviously a former president, that situation is, as we've been using this word a lot, unprecedented. But there are statutes, criminal statutes, that hold people responsible for or accountable for inciting violence against law enforcement agents. And in fact, an individual just a week ago, I think, was indicted for doing exactly that. We are in a new time. We're in a time of the use of social media. And so a lot of what we're used to in terms of threats, you know, coming through the US mails or something like that, no longer really apply. We're talking about a whole new tool that is in the hands of people who want to incite violence against law enforcement agencies. And that is simply despicable. There's nothing that can be said in defense of that. And people are using tools that are available now that maybe weren't available 20 years ago in order to whip up mobs based on emotion. And you can see the results in the attack in Cincinnati. And it's just not defensible.
Not at all. And I would like to remind people, January 6th, okay, prior to January 6th, the Michigan State Capitol, this is dangerous. Carol Lamb, thank you very much for your insights. Matthew Brown, you stick around, my friend, because we're going to keep chatting. Coming up, folks, the new midterm forecast, okay, leading both parties to revamp some strategies as Republicans working to protect democracy run into more roadblocks. We're going to get into the implications of Liz Cheney's primary defeat and more when my political panel joins me. But first, our favorite friend, my colleague Richard Louie, is here with today's other top news stories. Richard?
You're also my favorite friend. Thank you so much, Simone. Some stories we're watching for you this hour. At least 20 people have been killed in an attack at a hotel in Somalia's capital. Now, the Associated Press describes the attackers as Islamic militants. At least 40 more people were hit in that attack, which began with explosions outside the hotel before the militants then stormed inside the building. ISIS Fidel El-Shafi El-Sheikh was sentenced to life in prison after being found guilty on charges related to torturing and murdering U.S. hostages a decade ago. 4 of the roughly 24 Westerners taken captive were killed. The British national was one of 4 ISIS captors referred to as the Beatles. And Apple is urging people with iPhones, iPads, and Macs to make sure they are updating their devices with the latest security upgrades after identifying serious security vulnerabilities. According to Apple, those vulnerabilities could potentially allow a hacker to get complete control over impacted devices. Apple only identified certain device models as having that security flaw. More Simone right after this break.
Good luck to all of us as we end this program every time. Or we try to tell everybody, thank you for your prayers, thank you for your patience. God bless America. God bless America's troops. God bless America in her endeavors. And shalom.